Hello everybody. If you have not already read the original student example and the fixed body paragraph on your own, please pause this video and do that now. Okay, we're back. Hopefully you are able to read the original and the body paragraph, and what I'd like you to do before I start talking about it is please, in the little box, tell me two things that you noticed in the differences between the original and the revised one. Okay, so let's go over this part by part. So the original one, okay, I've highlighted these into and labeled into different chunks, okay, as you can see. The original did follow the outline roughly and had the minimum, but remember, what does minimum mean? A minimum to pass is a C, right? Now this does have some lovely stuff in it, but as the topic says here, the student example, what's important is having pertinent evidence and sufficient evidence. And you got to make sure to embed that evidence into the context of the story. Otherwise, it's not clear to your reader. You can't assume that they can read your mind, and that is kind of the hard part of communicating in all avenues, is being able to figure out what people know and don't know and how to make sure that those holes are plugged in, right? So let's talk about each part. Okay, to see what happened here and how we can make it better. So, as I said, there's some great stuff in this original. There's some really nice wording and some interesting philosophical connections here, but it just wasn't sufficient for what they were setting out to quote unquote prove. So let's beef that thing up and talk about it. So let's look at their original thesis statement to make sure that it's connected. So do you guys see that the thesis sentence is connected to the topic sentence? Please relook at that and answer that in the box. Okay, clearly it is connected, right? He talks about the metaphorical birth in his thesis statement of the usage of the metaphor of the birth process, right? In a new way, he brought it up, so the device he's focusing on is there. And then we look at the argument. It says Lessing emphasized the uncertainty of change, arguing that the hardest things about growing up is in the unknown world beyond childhood. Now, do you guys see anything that could be made better? What was the big difference between my topic sentence and his or hers? Okay, so hopefully you noticed that I wrote in present tense versus the past tense here, okay? And then they use the word things. Things could be any object in space or time, past, present, or future, abstract or concrete. So, you know, the universe. It's a little vague. So we want to make sure we're a little more specific about what do we mean, what kinds of things. So let's look and see how I beefed that up. So the original says here, by employing the metaphorical birth, Lessing emphasizes the uncertainty of change, arguing that of the hardest things about growing up is the unknown world beyond childhood. So I'm sure they meant one of the hardest things. So let's look at my topic sentence. I put to use this person's and kind of beef it up, because it's not really saying what in the story does this. It just kind of brings up the metaphorical birth again. So let's see how I added detail. To begin, Lessing emphasizes the uncertainty of change by employing a metaphorical rebirth through the protagonist's journey through an underwater tunnel, which she uses to argue that one of the most difficult struggles about growing up is facing the unknown world beyond childhood. Okay, so I stayed with the same ideas, but notice I was being specific and connecting it to what the character is doing with that, a little more detail, a little more context, okay? Because that was the big thing that we noticed was a problem in the original essays was most people did not build in really any story context, so the evidence just seemed kind of thrown out of the middle of nowhere, and it was confusing. So I'm already starting a little bit of context in my topic sentence to kind of help build the visual in the reader's mind. Because, like, what's a metaphorical birth, right? I don't even know what to, like, imagine in my head. Whereas now I'm like, oh, okay, so there's some character swimming through an underwater tunnel. Now my brain can, like, lock in. So let's move on to the next part. So looking at the yellow part, okay, the first rhetorical unit. This is a term used to describe kind of a whole chunk of an argument, right, where you have a piece of evidence and analysis and context. It's kind of like a little chunk of the whole kind of argumentative parts, where you've got context, evidence, analysis, commentary, okay, and connection to the universal, hopefully somewhere in there. So please relook at the two and tell me, what do you notice as different? Just tell me one thing you noticed. All right, you probably noticed it's a lot longer, and I put a lot more evidence in. So let's look. So I kept some of the language the same, so let's compare. The original says, in order to make it out of difficult circumstances, one must forge into the darkness ahead. Both of those are exactly the same. And then they put the proper parenthetical citation. It's embedded well, looks nice. And then let's see how it goes from that. So the original said, as Jerry makes his way through the tunnel, he comes close to drowning and realizes that if he is to survive, he must keep going even though he can't see what is in front of him. The reference to the darkness surrounding a child while it is being born emphasizes the fact that it is impossible to truly know what to expect when going through a major change or transition. Pressing forward is scary, and the void of the unknown is daunting, but it is necessary in order to reap the rewards of change. Okay, so you may have noticed that he does make a connection between the evidence and something about this kind of moving from being a child to an adult. And it does talk about that kind of moving forward, but is there anything really here about this being a rebirth quite yet? It does bring up this one little part about a child when it is being born, right? Coming from the darkness of the womb to the outside world, so it does have some, so it's very good. But let's look how mine's a little different here, right? Because I'm not sure that this is quite enough yet to kind of build the whole womb birth canal metaphor that's in the story of like that whole movement, and it's missing context as to why the heck he even wants to go through it. What is even the point of going through the tunnel? This is a first body paragraph. If that was not set up in an earlier body paragraph, it needs to be brought up here. Otherwise, you're kind of missing the whole rebirth point. The epiphany comes because of the why. He wants to fit in. He is conforming. He's willing to risk his life in order to be accepted by these older kids. He really cares what other people think. The epiphany that comes after going through that tunnel is realizing, I don't care what they think. And what matters is what I think about myself. And so he doesn't even bother.
Zachary Byers to the attendance office. Zachary Byers to the attendance office.
Sorry about that. You can tell where I am. Anyhow, all right, so without having the before kind of mental point of view, like if there had been a paragraph added before about the internal conflict, it would have been okay, but it wasn't. So that needs to be added. So I added that. Plus I added a lot more of the kind of womb imagery. So let's look at mine. Okay, and notice how I'm peppering it through. Lots of evidence throughout it. So I'm keeping their idea, but then I'm expanding on it. So let's look at mine. In order to make it out of challenging circumstances, one must forge into the darkness ahead. Jerry must, I used forge twice. Oh, let's fix that right now. Jerry must sally forth. Let's be pirates. Jerry must sally forth into the unknown by swimming through a dangerous ocean cave in order to prove to some older local boys that he too belongs with the big boys. Due to his strong desire to conform to what he perceives as their standards of being more of an adult, he challenges himself to make it through the womb-like cave, as each of them already have. After practicing and training. Oh, see, I'm catching problems. See how reading out loud to yourself? I told you, it works. I wanted that parallel structure. So here we go. After practicing and training, Jerry finally makes his way through the tunnel, but he comes close to drowning and realizes that if he is to survive, he must keep going, even though he cannot see what is in front of him. Notice how I moved it from can't to cannot. Contractions are considered informal. Okay, so I added a little bit more in there, and I'm going to keep going. Okay, so notice how I color-coded the rhetorical unit to be the same. You can see how it's kind of double the length. The references to the darkness surrounding a child while in utero emphasizes the fact that it is impossible to truly know what to expect when going through a major change or transition. Again, I'm keeping some of the original language. Pressing forward is scary, and the void of the unknown is daunting, but it is necessary in order to reap the rewards of change. See how I added context? That's really important. That was the big thing that was missing for so much of you. I was showing his why and where he is before, right, as he's going into the darkness as a child. Okay, now he only has 2 rhetorical units, or she, the original student. So I added one in orange, and then I made the third one connected to theirs, because it kind of goes from the beginning to the end, and the middle's not there. And that's important if you're going to bite off this giant, mouthful of picking the metaphor of the tunnel as one of your lit devices you want to focus on, because it's an extended big metaphor, and to fully explain it, it's going to take more than that minimum 2. Okay, so I added a whole rhetorical unit here. So let's look at the orange one. It's totally different. Look at how I have tons of little bits of evidence embedded and flowing through. So let me read it to you. So after I finish the first part, I move on to do so. Notice that bridge between one part to the next. To do so, he must push through the narrow crack of the cave head first, where he, quote unquote, finds his shoulders jammed, moving them in sideways, much like how a baby must do so in order to join the world outside of the mother. Once inside, he comes across something soft and clammy that reminds him of octopuses or a clinging weed, which less than clearly parallels to an umbilical cord and a soft uterine lining. Additionally, Jerry notices that the small, quote, small rock-bound hole is filled with yellowish-gray water akin to amniotic fluid. Do you notice how I'm putting in the block parentheses, right? This when I'm changing the part of speech to keep it present tense, right? Anyhow, continuing, he even counts his time limit of holding his breath, much like the counting a mother does when pushing during labor. Then towards the end of the rebirth process, his head gets stuck in a small exit hole and begins to swell while his lungs crack. Okay, see how I had that whole, the journey part in there, and I was making connections with birth. Now, I haven't done a lot of analysis yet because I'm just kind of trying to get through that. Okay, now we're going to do the last rhetorical unit here, where I'm going to talk about the exit and the epiphany that happened through this kind of extended metaphor of rebirth. Okay, so now notice the original. Look at the size. Look at mine. I know it's a fatty. This is a big one, but again, do all paragraphs have to be giant like this? No, but it is a big topic. Okay, so the one that they originally had, let's look at that one. And they did do a great job with having a bridge between the two parts of their argument, between their two rhetorical units. It was great, because if you look back at it, it said here in the yellow part again, pressing forward is scary and the void of the unknown is daunting, but it is necessary in order to reap the rewards of change. And then here we go into the next part, and the rewards of change are great. As, quote, an explosion of green light follows the trials and tribulations of significant change. Okay, so that bridge right there, so for those of you that had comments about not having a bridge, look how he did that, or she did that. Really good. Okay, so nice stuff. But I want you to tell me, do you see anything much about rebirth or birth imagery in this analysis? Please reread it again real quick and tell me in the box. Okay, do you see how it's not talking about birth? Not in any explicit way. And that's a problem, because remember, what's the topic sentence focusing on? It's trying to talk about the extended metaphor of the birth process as a kind of metaphor of his growth as a human being, right, and discovering who he is. So, whoopsies. So that's a problem. You want to make sure everything's all connected. So looking at it again, his says, or her says, and the rewards are great. I already said that part. So anyway, it continues after the evidence of the green light. And notice how the evidence is being used philosophically about the point, but not putting it within the context of what's going on in the story. You might want to do that, right? And that's beautiful. It's edited well. It's smooth, but it can be dangerous, because I saw a lot of people actually having nothing about the story and just kind of quote mining and pulling quotes out of the story to say some philosophical point, which was beautiful, but then it's not literary analysis, and we're not able to see how it's actually in the story. Now, they do talk about after the quote, so that's good, but let's see why it's not sufficient. So again, if we look at the topic sentence, what are we trying to prove? That there's a metaphorical rebirth on emphasizing the uncertainty of change, arguing that the hardest things about growing up is an unknown world beyond childhood. So let's see if it has that birth stuff. So it says, and the rewards are great. And then as an explosion of green light follows the trials and tribulations of significant change. As Jerry exits the tunnel, his senses are suddenly overloaded with victory after having almost died several times during the arduous swim through the rock. The final stage of this significant change is often the most painful all at once. However, if one can push past it, and it does take a large amount of willpower, the other side of change is breathtakingly beautiful. Lovely insight, but there's nothing about birth. They totally could have when they talked about almost dying, right there. Because, the birth process is painful and babies die. all the time, right? There's a lot of risk and like brain damage can happen because of being stuck in there and not being able to breathe and the umbilical cord being compressed. So, I mean, it's a dangerous thing, and women die too, right? Giving birth. So if they had added that, that would have really helped to make this more clear. Although it still needed the middle part for it to kind of really show that there's a womb-like thing happening or a birth thing happening. Just coming into a cave and out is not enough to really, it seems like a stretch, right? To say that that's a uterus and that a baby is being born, that's not enough, right? That would be really stretching. But all that stuff in the middle, right, that I added, that shows, oh, she totally put in a metaphorical womb for sure. So let's look at my blue. Let's see how it's different, and let's see how I add about the birth a lot. I talk more about that birth metaphor, and then I do the analysis showing the epiphany, going from why he went into the cave to what he actually learned about himself. Notice how that's also missing. It's just kind of a generalized, he saw the light at the end of the tunnel kind of the idea, but not saying what he learned. What was Jerry's epiphany? How was he reborn? That detail's missing. So let's look at mine, how I address that. So here we go in the last rhetorical unit that I added here, playing on some of the stuff the original had. So here we go. At the brink of his ignorant, childish state dying, he is rewarded with an explosion of green light that follows the trials and tribulations of significant change. So I kept that part. As Jerry exits the tunnel, his senses are suddenly overloaded with victory after having almost died several times during the arduous swim through the rock. Okay, same sentence again, but then I add, the final stage of a significant change is often the most painful all at once. Again, that's another sentence I took from the original, but then I put however. Oh, I'm sorry, that might even be them too. However, if one can push past it, and it does take an immense amount of willpower, the other side of change is breathtakingly beautiful. For Jerry, so now I'm adding for Jerry, got to make those dots connected. For Jerry, once he is safely out onto the shore, oops, I got another C, how I'm reading out loud, I'm finding boo-boos. I need to put he, not Jerry again. So let me start over again. For Jerry, once he is safely out onto the shore, he is able to truly see himself more, moving past the immaturity of caring about the approval of others. His rebirth into the world of adulthood helps him see what truly matters, what he thinks of himself. No longer needing validation from the older boys, he understands that it was no longer of the least importance to go to the bay, to show off that he too could swim through the tunnel. So see how I made that connection and talked about, show how it was his kind of like exiting the birth canal, right? That he grew, that needs to be there. And so looking at the conclusion, the original conclusion was, the implications of a literal birth sequence highlights that the process of changing is a struggle, yet it is both necessary and rewarding. Let's compare it to mine. In the box, tell me how mine's a little different. Okay, so let's look at mine. The imagery that parallels a literal birth sequence. So I added that because it could be taken in the original that it does have the phrase saying the implication of a literal birth, which is nice diction, I love that. But I think it could be misread as saying that that Lessing had a literal birth, which there wasn't, right? It's a metaphorical one. So it does say that, but I could see how it could be misunderstood. So I just wanted to make it clearer. So I said the imagery that parallels a literal birth sequence highlights that the process of personal growth is a struggle, yet it is both necessary and rewarding. And here's why I added, if one is to become a more fully aware, independent individual. Because remember, the whole thesis that you were supposed to be, the prompt question was about, the path to self-discovery can be a painful experience, right? So I just want to make sure to touch on that language of becoming an independent person and discovering who you are, right? So he learned that about himself, that he was this needy kid that really wanted approval of others, to being a much less needy kid and being more confident in himself. So that those great rewards that were hinted at in the original, I made more explicit. So it is a fatty. That is quite a paragraph. But that's the difference between, a high C paragraph or a C paragraph to an A paragraph. So the main issue here was not that there wasn't beautiful style. It was there wasn't enough pertinent evidence and analysis that connected to the plan, right, of showing how about the metaphor itself to help lay it out to make it clear to the reader that that Lessing really did lay out this extended metaphor. And I added the whole part about the impetus, the reason why he would do something so crazy, right? For this deep need to be accepted. So I hope this was helpful. If you guys would like to fix one of your body paragraphs from your essay and add the context and more evidence that was pertinent and on point, like I did here with the original, please look at the directions in Google Classroom. You have a week to get that into me, and it can give you a 10% grade boost. It cannot hurt you, I promise. If you make it worse, it's not going to go down, I promise. But you could get a 10% grade boost on your final grade or essay if you so choose to work on learning from what you had written to make it something better so that you can be a stronger writer in the future. Thank you so much, everybody, and let me know if you have any questions by emailing me. Don't put a question here because it's not a good place to answer you. I can't. All right. Bye-bye.